we don't have a solid ground to build upon. So that's why we started building Winding Tree, which is a set of standards for trial distribution. And it's the goal of that organization. We're a nonprofit. Everything is open source. The goal is to reduce the barriers for entry for trial startups as much as it's humanly possible, right? So blockchain is one of the technologies that we use there, but it's not the only one decentralized and open technology that we're using there. I love the HTTP technology, by the way, so we're using that as well. So that's in a nutshell what we're doing.
Nice. And one of your first, I said customers when we had a conversation yesterday,
right.
But you said partners, was the airline industry, so Lufthansa, and how you track bagging. And now you're working with Citizen M and Nordic Choice.
Right.
Could you tell us a little bit more about how you use your platform with these hotels?
So we had this assumption very early that for hotels it would be easier to kind of change their systems and work with us. But airlines just jumped on this idea of, removing intermediaries potentially from the distribution platforms. And Lufthansa was probably the first company that we signed a partnership contract with. All of those collaborations, all of those partnerships are on 3 different levels. So first of all, we need to learn what those organizations need, what those companies need really from open standards, right? So we work very closely with Lufthansa, with Air New Zealand, with our hotels to learn from them what they really need. And they contribute their engineers actually in all of those companies, their engineers are working on and poking holes in our stuff that we're building right now. And Lufthansa also participated in our token generation event as well, so they give us a little bit of money to work with. Nice.
And Stuart from Striptease. Striptease. And so we were having a conversation the other day, and we talked about OTAs, and well, Matt talked about it earlier about how this is a different angle on direct bookings. Could you elaborate on that?
Yeah, I'll just do a very quick intro. I'm Stuart, obviously from Striptease, not Striptease. It's we get it all the time. It's good. I'm a principal engineer, so I'm heavily involved in actually building the product. But yeah, I mean, back to the whole OTA question. I mean, our mission is to kind of drive, customers directly to your hotel website to book with you directly, because we believe that's the best experience the guest can get with you, and we're very keen to kind of make sure that the hotels themselves are gathering the data on the guest right from the get-go. So we're really early in the journey. We're on your site. Typically, we find that people will at least look at your site when booking through even an OTA. They'll come and have a good look, and we try and capture them and keep you on the site. Now to do that allows us to provide you guys the data rather than giving it to the OTA, because every time a customer comes and books through an OTA, they get the data, not you. And we think sort of in the long term, that's going to be a massive detriment. So I kind of might have skirted the question a little bit there, I'm sorry, but that's...
No, that's perfect. And next we have the startup battlefield. To just go a little bit back in Striptease, you were telling me a little bit about how they pivoted a few times and started with an e-card, is that right?
That's right. It was a way of kind of promoting the hotels. We started off in kind of e-postcards where a guest would come and stay at a hotel and they'd get an opportunity to send out an e-postcard from that hotel to their friends and family and say, hey, cool, look at this awesome hotel. It's really cool. You should come and stay here. And our early investors absolutely loved this idea. They thought it was wonderful. But pretty soon, our founders kind of realized, well, there's no money in this. We're not going to make any money out of this, and it's not really going to help the hotel all that much. So they landed the first round of investment, and then immediately pivoted and just said, no, we're going to go and build something else. So Price Check was born, and we found that price check really increased the stickiness of a client on your website. So they went with that, and the investors kind of went along with the ride, and they were very happy with the results. But yeah, we've grown and pivoted around that since.
Yeah, and I think it's been quite successful, so that's great. And Martin is a CTO at City Hub. So they have, at the moment, 2 hotels in Amsterdam and Rotterdam, but you guys are starting to grow quite a bit, yeah?
Yeah, that's right. So I'm CTO at City Hub, which basically means everything that doesn't work is my fault. We right now have 2 hotels. The first one opened about 3 years ago. The second we opened just a few months ago in Rotterdam. And we now plan to open about 25 in the next 5 to 7 years all over Europe. We're currently working on financing that. And we have, our concept is a bit between a hotel and a hostel. So you got a private space of a hotel, you got a really nice 2-person bed, but you can't stand in the bed because above or below your bed is another room. So they're a bit Tetris-shaped L. So you got a small private space, but it's a really nice and fancy space. And then a lot of shared spaces. So we got bathrooms and so on, which are pretty high-end. And then the whole thing is self-service through technology. So that's also why with even only 1 hotel, we had a CTO. I started about a year ago. And so the check-in is self-service, the bar is all self-service. You get a wristband, and you can get your own beers or mix your own cocktails. And then you can control the room lights with your app. So everything is self-service. And then next to that, we have a 24-hour host. It's not always the same person, but there's somebody there 24/7 to basically give you tips on the city, where to go out, where to get dinner, and so on, either in the hotel or through the app. Nice.
And so for prior to a few months ago, you only had 1 hotel. So you told me it was rather unique that they created a CTO for 1 hotel. I know a lot of big chains are doing this. So how was that experience for you coming into the company like that?
Well, a year ago, I had no idea what a PMS was or an OTA. So I'm more from the startup scene than from the hotel scene. But I do think these guys are getting sort of a modern. Like 2 years ago, we won most innovative hotel in the world. But I think what we're doing isn't that we're not doing rocket science. It's just that all other hotels are doing almost nothing. So it's pretty easy to do something innovative. But I think we're definitely not where we want to go towards the future. But I do think for us, automated technology is a lot of, it makes a lot of sense in our concept, but you do need to have somebody in-house that sort of controls the technology in a direction, and especially where we want to grow. It started as sort of a mixed mash of different bolted-on services, and we basically last year rebuilt the whole system to be ready to scale it to the chain that we want to be. So yes, I do think for us it makes sense. For our target customers, which are usually millennials, they understand that they don't need to check in with the reception desk and be in line there, but they do a self-service check-in and it's a lot quicker. So for us it works really well. But I think a lot of hotels are mostly doing things because they've always done it that way, and there's not that many hotel startups. City Up was started by 2 students who spent a few years raising the money to start their first hotel, but then it really took off because there's not that many startups doing that.
Nice, really cool. And Richard, fabulous presentation. I also wanted to introduce you from the other side. So Richard's the CEO of NPD Hotels, which you're now rebranding to Whisper, and you're meeting your 2 worlds with what 3 words and your chain. So could you describe this a little bit more? Yeah.
Sure. So NPD Hotels is an investment company. We have an alternative funding model. So what we do is we find a hotel that we want to buy. Mostly, nearly always, it is undervalued, usually poorly run, not always. And we look for a hotel that needs and has value in it that we can identify through everything that these guys are talking about and the panel before. So it's about systems, and most of the hotels we buy don't have any. It's about training, it's about branding, etc. So what we do is we find a hotel, we do a fairly quick exchange of contracts, but we ask for a deferred completion of that contract, which might be 9 to 12 months. And in that time, we sell individual bedrooms to investors from around the world. And then we take the money that the investors have given us to buy the hotel and then refurbish it. And we refurbish it with our own construction company, and then we operate it. And we're looking for about 40 hotels. When I joined in July last year, we had 3. We now have 10 open and operational. And by January the 14th, we'll have 13 open and operational with another 2 that we bought. So it's an alternative funding model. It was born out of the collapse of Lehman Brothers and the recession in 2008.
Nice. And so the Whisper hotels are going to have the 3 words on the side of it, as well as your booking confirmation.
Yeah.
Won't only have the address, it'll have my 3 words.
Yeah, so it'll actually have the 3-word address embedded in the booking confirmation for all of our guests to have a better experience of getting from A to precisely B. So as we now know, we've already mentioned Airbnb a few times, and people like Home and Away. It's not always about going to a named hotel, it's about going to an address. And you might not know the addressing system, but you do know that if you have a 3-word address, it's the same universal addressing system from Shanghai to San Francisco.
Nice. And Maxim, blockchain gets a stigma sometimes. Why is that?
I don't know.
Is it the association with Bitcoin or the lack of understanding of what blockchain is?
The short answer is people are lazy. They don't try to educate themselves about the technology. And yeah, it's very easy. And I've met a few very, very smart people, and for them it took weeks to understand it, right? There is a learning curve. It took weeks for you?
No, I think it's not people being lazy. It doesn't give them, like when the internet started 15, 20 years ago, my parents, within like 1 or 2 years of me being on it, asked me to send emails. Even my grandma did, and she wanted to pay me for the postage to Canada.
That's true. But
Blockchain now exists for 10 years almost, but my parents don't see any use case which I can do through the current system. So I think either the interface is way too complex or the use case isn't explained well, and I don't think you can blame them for being lazy.
Right. I'm not talking about people like my mom or my dad. I'm talking about people who, like, their job is to understand technology, and they just say, no, this is nonsense. And there is a learning curve, and again, people, consultants and journalists, we had this amazing email exchange with Pamela Whitby, and I don't know, it took us like 20 emails to kind of wrap our heads around what is that, and she did a great job, covering what that technology is. And she was sometimes emailing me and saying, hey, I was having a dinner with my family, and I was explaining them what it is, and they asked me all these questions that I cannot answer. So here they are, right? And like 10 questions. There is a learning curve. It's not easy to understand it. You don't have to be a rocket scientist to do that, by the way. The concept, if you want a 1 minute or 30 seconds idea, is Bitcoin was created to remove intermediaries from financial transactions. That was the goal. That was the plan. And that idea of creating systems where we don't need an intermediary anymore to conduct certain transactions is absolutely the core. That is it, right? Easy to understand, that basic idea. The implications, much, much harder. And there is a bunch of really, really smart people out there who right now are working on all sorts of absolutely crazy use cases for that my dad wouldn't understand. He doesn't even think about that, how it can change democracy, governance, politics, like all those things, right?
I think, if I may add to that, I don't know if anybody was at I for Travel earlier this year, but there was a panel about blockchain, and the title of the panel was Demystifying Blockchain. But I won't say who the 3 people on the panel were, but unfortunately Max couldn't actually fly in, he couldn't get a visa. But the 3 people by the end were laughing about blockchain. And they were very, very senior people in our industry. And the moderator at the end said, well, I don't know if we've demystified it or made it more confusing. These are exactly the same people who were laughing about the internet being used for hotel reservations 20 years ago, in my opinion. And not the three panelists, because they were pretty smart and multi-millionaires, but the same sort of mindset. I remember presenting in Berlin at ITB in 1998, and people came up to me afterwards. I was working at CNN at the time, and people came up afterwards and said, Richard, what are you doing? Nobody is going to make a reservation or book a hotel on the internet. They'll always have to speak to someone first. Do you know that if you'd invested $50,000 in Booking.com in 2007, you'd have 14 million in the bank right now? I think they made a big mistake. My view is that blockchain is potentially the most innovative new idea in our industry for 20 years. What we need is really, really smart people to figure out how to use it.
So, Stuart, we talked about OTAs. You guys are coming in from a different angle with direct bookings. The whole idea of blockchain, and while we're on the topic, is decentralized. So, essentially, you could book on a platform cutting out the middleman and, I guess, make for a more competitive market. Is this something that you guys think about?
So I'll be perfectly honest, at the minute we're not investing in blockchain just because, again, you need, it's the investment you need to actually understand it is huge. Now, it's not saying we're not going to look at it, but at the minute we're not. But I still think it's fascinating. I mean, it is one of the, it's such an incredible technology. And I think for the hotel industry in particular, it's going to have quite wide implications. But I don't think you'll really have to deal with understanding the blockchain from a hotel's perspective. The technology providers will come and give you something that will use it underneath the hood. And I can see like two massive areas where I think this is going to be hugely impactful in the near future. One is the supply chain for hotels. I think simplifying that and making it a distributed system will be incredible. And I mean, that's effectively what the blockchain is. It's a distributed database that you verify, and you're involved in verifying the transactions on, and that's all it really is. And then the other side is obviously something that we're interested in, which is following the room availability flow through the supplier chain. So, for example, you'll release some rooms through to your channels, and they may rather naughtily sell it on to somewhere who then suddenly start offering it at a cheaper price. But with blockchain, you can put smart contracts in there that would track that transactional flow and force like a certain minimum price on the room, and you can't buy the room without it. So I just think this is going to be revolutionary for the industry. The trouble is we need people to adopt it, and that's really, really hard when they don't understand it.
I would just add this thing. The idea behind blockchain, kind of this fundamental philosophy, is that how do you cut out the middleman? Well, you learn the tools to do everything yourself, right? So you don't need a bank in regards to Bitcoin, for example. You don't need a bank anymore because, well, actually, there is a very, very simple tool. Again, for example, to send a Bitcoin transaction. I can teach anyone to do that within 10 minutes, right? It's very, very easy, extremely easy. So the idea is that, and I really like your approach with like you have a CTO for one hotel, right? Because we live in more and more technological world. Technology is by far the most important factor in changing how humans live. And affecting the planet, the environment, et cetera, right? But we live in this more and more technological world, and therefore, if we don't learn how to exist in that world, if we don't learn technology, if, let's say, you needed to talk to some other company to use your smartphone, right? No, of course, you're more than capable to operate a touchscreen device, right? You don't need an intermediary here. And that's the idea here as well. In order to send money, you don't need a bank as an intermediary that claims that only they possess the knowledge and the technology to make that transaction. And that was the case before Bitcoin, right? And with hotels and other travel companies, all those companies have to become technology companies. If you don't do that, if you do not possess this knowledge of how to use technology in the modern world, if you delegate it to some intermediary, and that's, by the way, how global distribution systems were created. right, in the airline industry. Yes, a bunch of airlines said, oh, we don't want to deal with that. How about you, one company, how about you do that? And then through a series of events, those companies became those intermediaries that stifled innovation, in my opinion, and do those things, right? So again, I think hotels, all travel companies have to be technology companies. They have to understand how to use those things. And technology intermediaries and consultants are maybe as dangerous as Google's of today's.
Nice, thank you. I'm going to pivot from blockchain for a bit. So Gartner did a study that 85% of customers by 2020 are going to have a control over the entire experience without a human with enterprises. I think that's something that you guys are already doing quite well with the self-check-in. You can pour a beer yourself. How is that, and where do you see yourself on the spectrum? Can it go further?
It's good to hear. I hadn't heard about the study yet, but I do think we're almost there. Like the whole service, the whole experience, you don't need to talk to a person, but we have a really nice person there to talk to you, and it's their main role to be there for you with any questions you have. But I do think we're still not there yet. The experience in an Uber is still less friction than walking into a city hub, and I would really like that to be a similar experience. If I leave an Uber, I don't have to think about payment because it's already handled. Right now, if you leave a city hub, in about half the cases it's handled, but because of a whole complex flow with OTAs and so on, it's not always the case you can just walk out. But I really like to go there in terms of low friction. You could just walk in, the hotels knows who you are, and you don't need to talk to anybody if you don't want to. And they will still have the nice person there to tell you about the yoga class around the corner.
Sure. We were discussing this the other day at Mews, the fact that the OTA could take your credit card and then you arrive and have to give them your credit card again just in case you have some damages. That would never happen at the end of your extended Uber trip. So I think this is kind of what you're touching on.
Yeah.
So, and then the next thing, which I think you guys do really well, is the personalization. But I wanted to hear a little bit from Trip T's side. How are you like reinventing how like personal you get to your customer?
Right, so I mean, with our platform, we're actually pulling all of our products together so that when the guest comes to your site and will browse around it, look at some searches, decide whether or not they're going to go through the booking funnel or not, we can kind of tailor an experience. So we pull all the information and allow the platform itself to tailor the kind of messaging through to that guest. Now, I mean, I think it's much, much bigger than just the guest experience on the site and in the hotel. There's even like, all the way back to the SEO level where people are starting to search. And there are some startups in the space that are kind of hooking up the likes of flight data and hotel data and so on. So it'll predict when you're going to be checking in based off the flight time that you've also booked and send that through to the hotel so then they are able to prepare the room in time and so on and make sure everything is good. But the personalization side of things is going to be a massive key because, again, we saw in some of the examples here, the data that's available to the hotel at the time the guest is coming in allows them to really tailor that welcome experience when they come in. Oh, you're right, you don't like black coffee, no problem. We'll make sure you've got like your latte in the morning or whatever it happens to be. But it's incredible.
So personalization comes at a cost these days. So GDPR is the word that we probably say at Mews about 10 times a day because we take it very seriously and we're always building new products. How do we tackle this challenge?
So, I mean, we've recently obviously gone through GDPR as well, and I say every hotel has to deal with this. And I think, again, it's relying on partners to kind of help you. So the likes of Mews will obviously help you when an old guest will turn up and say, hey, can you guys kind of forget about me? I never stayed there. But I think all of your technology partners are going to have a policy in place that you can reach out to them and say, our guest has asked to be forgotten. And if they can't respond to that, then in reality, I don't think you should really be using them because you're liable. So it's a massive impact to the industry. And I think, again, you have to make sure your technology partners are on top of it.
Maxim, how do you imagine tackling this challenge within your scope?
So, this is a very complicated topic, and first of all, we can and have to employ certain technological measures to make sure that, you know, whenever I share my information with someone, there is no like residue of that information that company stores. But it's impossible to do today, right? Because, well, I go to a website and they take my email. For some reason, they assume that now they are in the right to send me all sorts of promotional emails. Okay, I try to unsubscribe, click that link 5 times, nothing happens. They keep sending me emails. Like, how can we make sure that that doesn't happen? And this is a simple use case, of course, compared to the hotel stuff. How can we make, even if they say that they deleted my information, they say, okay, we removed your account. How do I know that that's true? Take it further. That organization, even they think that they removed all my information from their databases. But how do we know how that algorithm was implemented on their end? Maybe the engineer made a mistake and there is, you know, a bunch of information that's just stored somewhere. And when the hacker accesses it, of course, it's complicated. Anyway, and we can go down that rabbit hole very, very
Long conversation.
But what there are projects out there, and there are certain technologies like homomorphic encryption, which basically means that I can send my private information completely encrypted. Or maybe it would happen the other way around. I have my information in my phone, on my device somewhere, right? And someone sends me requests to run a certain algorithm on my phone to process that information in a certain way. And without sharing any personal details, without sharing my name, password number or anything like that, now they know that I like latte versus tea, right? Something like that. There are different ideas, and blockchain can definitely help with that, because again, the fundamental philosophy here, you should be in control of your own data. You should share it with certain parties only when you really want to share that, stuff like that.
Nice. I think we only have a couple minutes left, but I wanted to go down and ask each one of you, what do you think is next in the future of hospitality? And I'll drop a couple things out there for you. There's augmented reality, other types of artificial intelligence. There's the whole Uberizing self-check-in experience. Let's start with Richard.
To me, hospitality was, is, and always will be about choice. It's about getting these smart guys on the right to deliver that choice to the guest. Sometimes you don't want to see anybody when you check in. Sometimes you want to have lots of people around you to find out about the city and what it is that you can do. And it depends whether you're traveling on business, when you're traveling on leisure. There may be you're the same human being, but I think that our industry sort of segments the human being in some weird way. Like the head is business, the body is leisure, and the legs are what we used to call mice. They're sort of running around doing all this sort of stuff. So,
and is the hotel the one to innovate, or is it these guys to push you to innovate?
As far as I'm concerned, we're not innovators. I mean, the hotels should be innovators, but we're not technologists. What we need is actually to outsource and adopt the right technology for the style of operation that we're running. Because what you're doing at City Hub may not fit, for example, a Four Seasons hotel. I'm not saying it won't, but it may not.
Makes sense. Martin?
Yeah, I do think it's a lot of it is about flexibility and about really lowering the barriers to access. So I want to walk in, walk out whenever I feel like, and there will be a lot of technology in the background. If you right now in the City Hub change the color of the lights, which you can do in the room, there's about 10 computers involved, and some of them in other countries. But nobody, well, except for me, should have to think about those computers. They just want to change the colors of the lights. And we do want to go a lot further with that in having your own personalized experience. And there will probably be a lot of technology, but it should be really in the background. And you should just have the best experience for you at that moment, which might be different next day or next week.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll try and be brief. But again, I think it's, what these guys have said. It's flexibility. It's doing the basics right. from the website through to the booking side, into the hotel itself, and then progressive enhancement. Bring in kind of partners that are going to enhance that experience. And we saw Edward on the screen as a great example of that. They've got they focused on the basics, they got all the apps and so on working, so the processes were wonderful, and then brought in Edward for the guest to kind of interact without having to deal with a human. From the sort of guest experience from online perspective, we kind of got a similar product, so I shouldn't pitch, but our auto agent is customizable to the hotels, and they can kind of perform a similar pre-booking guest experience as Edward for any of the hotels. But I'll leave it at that. Oh, and if you want to talk about it further, come and get me and I'll give you some socks.
Max, what's a game changer?
Right. So all those things, flexibility and choice and personalization, all those things, the essence of innovation is experimentation, right? Without that, without failing 99 times, you cannot find this one amazing solution. And for us to enable that essence of innovation, we should have access to all sorts of open technologies that you can take very easily without relying on one company and all sorts of complicated licenses and stuff. So that's the change I personally want to see here, right? I want to see travel companies using more and more technologies that are open, experimenting, creating new products, trying to improve travel for us travelers.
Nice. Thank you. And do we have time for one or two questions?
We have time for one question.
One question from the audience. Anybody?
Really good one.
A really good question.
Right?
I hope it's what does GDPR stand for?
Well, no, it isn't. With regards to the money that you actually have to spend on tech, how does the impact of the OTAs affect directly your actual ability to spend money on tech to keep ahead of the game and to move things into personalization?
I can maybe speak to that. So tech...
Personally, I think I'm outspoken about the OTAs. I have massive respect for them, but I'm also actually sort of not greatly in favor of them. They strip out huge margin from this industry and give nothing back. Does a guest ever meet anyone from an OTA? The fact is that our industry is backward in coming forward. So back to the future, basically we need to get our act together. We have guests in our hotels for hours and hours and hours. It's up to us to really encourage that guest to be loyal to us. The fact is that if you look up OTAs versus hotels, the words are battle, unhappy marriage, war. Is this a partnership? No, it's not. It's actually the OTA stripping margin out of our hotels, and that limits the amount of money we can spend on our properties, refurbishing, changing carpets, cleaning the curtains, in order to give the guest a better experience.
But I don't... It's a complicated relation, I fully agree, but we're in a building with a lot of different startups, and I know if I go to any of them and say, I have about as much customers as you want for 15%, they will all say, where can I sign up? And of course, for us, we spend a few $100,000 on OTAs a year, and we have a big incentive to lower that, and we're doing fairly well on that. But I think in general, a lot of hotels also are in a really luxurious position where they just open the door and guests come in because of the OTAs. And it is quite a nice position. Other industries would love to have that.
So I think the key point on that question to me was about the personalization side. And the fact that if people are going into your hotels via an OTA, they are able to personalize the journey. You are not. Like, you as a hotel are going to miss all of that information, and you can't personalize it. So to me, it's absolutely key to get more people directly booking with yourself so you can get that information. Now, I'm not saying you guys all have to become technical wizards, you be able to build wonderful websites and so on, but you do need to partner up with people who can. And that's where I think getting the act together, so you put it much more eloquently than I could, but getting your act together has to be around that, like get the partners in.
So in terms of the cost of the technology, I sometimes give this example of, let's say you wanted to call from London to New York like 30 years ago. You wanted to make a phone call. and you only had one choice, and the cost of that, I think I was calculating it last time, I think it was about $27 per minute in today's dollars, right? And today I have like 10 different applications on my phone that I use to call people around the world for free. Video calls, something that we couldn't even dream of 30 years ago, right? My point is technology becomes less and less cheaper. It becomes easier and easier to use that technology. And perhaps in the travel industry, we forgot to educate ourselves about what are the technologies that are available today that we could potentially use to, we don't maybe have to rely on this expensive technology, the technology that charges you, I don't know, 20% margin, 10, 20, whatever it is today, right? And we could use it to our advantage. I mean, how many hotels are using fax machines today? How many organizations in the travel industry? Well, I was talking to a company that handles your luggage at airports all the time. They're using teletypes. It's not a joke, it's for real.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think we went over on time, so I probably have to drink.
I think.
But I appreciate it to all of you. Thank you.
Thank you guys.